Hello everybody, welcome back to Theje's Notebook Review. I'm your host, Joel Michael. What we're doing today is we are playing games with my latest review victim. This is the Acer Aspire 3. It's got a Core i3 in him and nothing else. Not a dedicated GPU in sight. We're going to see how well it plays. Dead cells first. And so far so good. It's only a 2D game, not a single polygon in sight. At least I don't think this game uses polygons. I think it uses just 2D sprites that look like polygons. All those cool Super Nintendo games from way back in the day. Hey, 60 Hertz is running just fine. Let's go ahead and exit the game and try it in 120. And here we are in 120 Hertz using, once again, the lowly Core i3 with nary a dedicated GPU in sight. Now, the laptop display itself can't do 120 Hertz, but the monitor I'm using most certainly can, and the Acer Aspire 3 can certainly output 120 Hertz through HDMI. And now I'm in a really complicated room and I should probably concentrate on what I'm doing, but who cares? This is doing 120 Hertz pretty gloriously, I might say. So, ow, I just took it in the butt. Spikes up the butt, never fun. Hey, let's move on to the next game. Oh, I broke the floor. Die, things! We're gonna stick with the 2D trend for at least one more game. This is Rayman Origins. It's known to have given some lesser CPUs way back in the day a run for their money, but this Core i3, no, it seems just fine. Something to be of note about this Core i3 and its Intel UHD processor, no, it's not Intel Iris Xe graphics, but it does use the same method of calculating how much power it has. What I mean by that is they're both measured by how many execution cores they have. This Core i3 has 40 execution cores, and then the Core i5 has 80 or 82 execution cores, something like that. The last time I reviewed a Core i5 notebook was a long time ago, so you have to forgive me for not remembering the exact numbers. And then the i7 has like 92 or 96 or something like that. One of those two as well. Hey, Rayman Origins looks like it performs just fine. Let's move on to something else. For our first pseudo 3D test, we're getting into Hot Shots Racing. This is a very simple 3D game, a racing game, in case you didn't already notice. No textures, and this is 1080p in what they call high details. Although compared to most games, you can't really call it high details. 60 FPS all the time, and the monitor is set to 120 Hertz. Unfortunately, 120 Hertz is not available. Let's try turning VSync off to see if it'll go over 60 FPS. And it sure will, but let that be a lesson to you, because when you turn VSync off on any kind of Intel GPU, whether it be this or Intel Iris Xe, it's going to give you really, really bad, jerky frame rates, and it's going to look less than the refresh rate of the monitor. This is definitely not looking like 60 FPS. Lesson learned. Let's move on to the next game. We're trying to play Crash Bandicoot now. This is the Sane Trilogy, the first game of this Sane Trilogy. This is in 720p, pure 720p though. I mean, 1280 by 720 resolution, not 1366 by 768, because we are going to be a dick about it. VSync is on, of course, lowest detail settings possible, and we're struggling to hit 60 frames per second. Now, we're getting pretty close, and the motion is overall pretty smooth, but it's also kind of jerky, and you definitely don't want to turn VSync off, because it's just gonna look worse. Hey, let's move on to the next game. Time for a little Kingdoms of It's time now for a little Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning. I just love this game to death, which is why I always like to play it for these kinds of videos. Here we are in 1366 by 768 in all the detail settings turned up to the maximum. And even though this game is super old and this GPU is super new, it just doesn't have enough power to play the game in these detail settings. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it up to 1080p, but play the game in low to see if we can get 60 FPS. Did I say 1080p? I meant 1600 by 900 because that is the maximum resolution of the laptop's screen itself. So no 1080p for this right now. But we are seeing solid 60 FPS here in low details. I do have anisotropic filtering turned up to the maximum, but everything else like shader quality, textures, is all on low, and we're getting 60 FPS constantly out of everything. So that is very promising, I guess. It means that you can definitely enjoy playing some old games as well on your Acer Aspire 3. Let's move on to something else. We're gonna try playing some Lego Marvel superheroes now. We're flying around some big city, probably Manhattan, as Iron Man, and we've actually been in the game already for about a minute, which means that these textures should be fresh in memory somewhere, but they certainly ain't, because we don't have any VRAM to store them in. So every time you turn a corner, yeah, it's gonna stutter a little bit, and we're struggling to get 60 FPS. This is 1600 by 900 with the texture setting set to high. So let's see if there's anything we can do to get 60 FPS out of this scene in Lego Marvel. Okay, we've lowered everything to pretty much low, including the shaders and the textures. We're trying to fly around in Manhattan and get 60 FPS. We can see it sometimes, but every time we turn around and reload those textures, just nothing gets remembered. Let's run around in town, see if, because you know, when you run around town, things change. So let's see what we've got. We're still not seeing 60 FPS. So you turn corners and then, you know, yeah, you gotta load in all those textures. No VRAM means stuttering whenever. But that's not all games. I mean, Marvel is actually, well, okay, Marvel's coded pretty well, I think. Even my GTX 770 can do 60 FPS. In this game, my GTX 1070 can do 120 FPS. No problem, but it has 8 gigs of VRAM. Right quick before we move on to the next game, I have 12 gigs of RAM in here now, and I was hoping that more memory would solve our stuttering problem when we're turning around, but nope. We're still dropping frames when we have to load in a bunch of new textures. Oh well. Now let's move on to the next game. It's time for a little bit of Tunic. I'm just kidding, I know it's pronounced Tunic. This is 1600 by 900 with the details mostly off. I think shaders are actually on high. Hey, and now that we did that effect, we know that that can run at 60 FPS. This is running excellent. I mean, this is good. This is good stuff right here. We're struggling to hit 60 sometimes, so I can't really say it's a struggle to hit 60, but sometimes we go below 60 FPS a little bit. I would be perfectly happy playing this game at this resolution and this detail level at all times. I would not be happy to play this game when facing these enemies at all times, but this isn't half bad. So let's see just what happens for S's and gigs if we turn stuff up. See, shadow quality is on high. If we turn the SSAO quality just to medium and the depth of field on, not even FXAA, look at that. I'm not even out of the menu yet, and oh my goodness, why do I keep on pressing B when I shouldn't? We are not even getting 50. That's ugly. No, this is gross. Not gonna do it. Let's move on to something else. Please. We are now in Forza Motorsport 7. Seeing how well I can drive a McLaren 650S around the Nürburgring in 60 FPS on a Core i3 with no dedicated GPU. Apparently not very well. I'm in place. What is that? I don't know. It's covered by my frame rate. Hey, frame rate, get out of my way so I know where I am in the pack. I don't care. We are cruising at 60 FPS in very low details quite nicely. It does skip and stutter at times, but as of right now, when we're on the straightaway, we don't have a lot of other cars on the screen. It's running pretty well, and then we turn corners and get that kind of stuttering goodness because we don't have any VRAM. I think actually that might improve if we have more than 8 gigs of RAM in here. I think that we are definitely RAM limited, and that this game, I know for a fact, this game performs better on more than 8 gigs of memory. I've seen that before. Now we're trying the same thing in Forza Horizon 7, but with 12 gigs of RAM instead of the 8 gigs that the notebook shipped with, and this is night and day. It's absolutely 100% better. I'm not seeing annoying stuttering. The loading times are significantly reduced between tracks, and I'm not seeing, like textures don't pop in every time I turn a corner. This is great. I feel like I could bump up a couple detail settings up a little bit. We won't get too crazy though. I mean, this is still like the lowest of the low details in 1366 by 768, but this is actually a playable game and a good gameplay experience. So, yeah. Put more RAM in it. So we're in Witcher 3 right now with all low details, 720p, and that's strictly 720p, not 1366 by 768, 720p. We're struggling to hit 30 FPS. It's not limited to 30 FPS, mind you. See, we're going over 30 FPS as I speak. Now we're dipping below. But yeah, this frame rate, absolutely awful. This is Novigrad though. This is the most intensive part of the game. Let's see what happens if I am in this part here. This is the least intensive part of my usual run through Novigrad. We're getting almost 40. I saw 41. There's 41 again. So if we lower the FPS to 30, which is pretty much what we're seeing right now anyway, it might be a little bit more smooth for us. At least in its consistency, it would appear to be a little bit more smooth. And it's actually, it wouldn't be half bad. I mean, in the normal parts of the game, which are not as intensive as this, I'm sure it'll look just fine. Of course, without VRAM, it skips and stutters a lot when you're fighting enemies, especially in the open world. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, if you're okay with that, Witcher 3, playable on the Acer Aspire 3. Now we're playing, or at least we're trying to play, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. This is the Peruvian jungle. This is the same level that I'm always in whenever I do my playing with this notebook videos. I did try to play Forza Horizon 5 and Doom Eternal on this thing. Forza Horizon 5 loaded through the menus, but crashed. And Doom Eternal just gave me a straight up, "You don't have enough VRAM to play me, I'm quitting," error message. So at least Shadow of the Tomb Raider tries to play. This is 720p in the lowest of the low details, and this is not playable. Absolutely not. Sorry, if you have an Acer Aspire 3, you can't play Tomb Raider. If you think you can play it, if you think this is playable, you're crazy and dumb, and you just need to fork out more money for a real computer. Okay? Or just stop playing Tomb Raider games, because whatever, this isn't that great anyway. Hey, let's move on to the next game. Well, the day had to come eventually where I bring Grand Theft Auto 5 back to this series, especially now, because people keep on asking about it. And I never want to play it because, well, it's just a huge install and a big pain in the butt to learn how to configure without having to restart the game a whole bunch. It's a big pain in the ass. And you might wonder to yourself, Joel, how the hell did you fit this on this tiny little 256 hard drive? Well, I put a bigger one in here, and you can watch that video up in the top right hand corner, where I installed a 1 terabyte Samsung 2.5 inch SSD. It was pretty easy, and I go through all the steps, and here we are in Grand Theft Auto 5. This is 1366 by 768. We're struggling to get 30 FPS. That's jumping around, stuttering so much, and you can't set the graphics any lower than this, and it's running like absolute garbage. But you know what? It's still, I can't say it's running like garbage because it's still more playable than Shadow of the Tomb Raider was. Although I don't know. I would stick to older Grand Theft Auto. Maybe Grand Theft Auto 3. Oh, sorry. Would be maybe Grand Theft Auto 3 would be a little bit more playable on this thing. I don't know. Of course it should be. Anyway, this Grand Theft Auto 5 on the Acer Aspire 3, sorry, with the UHD Intel graphics processing unit. Let's move on to something else. Oh, sorry, Stare and Drive wasn't working out for me. Did you think you were going to get away without seeing Diablo 3 on this thing? Oh, you naive fool. Of course we're playing Diablo 3. This is 1600 by 900 with all the details settings set to low, but the screen is a maximum of 120 hertz. So even though VSync is kind of on, that's going to reduce our frame rate by a bit. But like I said before, and I'll say it again, especially if this is the only game that you watch this entire video, we have VSync on for a good reason, because it's Intel. If you're playing with an Intel GPU, you should have VSync on. Because if you have VSync off, it just looks like garbage. The frame rate skips a whole bunch. So, it can go higher than 60 if it wants to, but it doesn't want to, especially with all these enemies on the screen. Some of the environments are a little bit more forgiving, not this one. So this is a great example of how Diablo 3 is going to run on the Acer Aspire 3. Let's move on to the next game. Of course, we're going to play some Overwatch on this thing. This is 720p in the lowest of the low details. And, yeah, so we're going in less than 60 FPS at all times. So, yeah, not that fantastic, but I guess it's better than nothing. It's playable. Very playable. When I played this for the review of this notebook, you saw the frame rates dropping quite a bit. That's because I was playing in 1366 by 768, and so it was a little bit higher resolution than this, and trying to heal my guys. And this is playable. Of course, this is a smaller environment than I was playing before, so... But yeah, no, this isn't half bad. As long as you can tolerate the extremely low frame rate, you'll be just fine. I hope I'm playing this guy correctly. I'm shooting my guys, and it's supposed to be healing them. So, yeah. So we're right here in the middle of the thick of things, and the frame rate is holding up quite well. Not too terrible at all. Hey, let's move on to the next game. Now here's a first for this series. I'm playing some emulator games instead of more PC games, and we're playing games from a very popular cube-shaped console that came out a long time ago, and it looks like it's playing pretty smoothly for the most part, but it does actually drop frames every once in a while, so it's not absolutely perfect, but it is actually not half bad as long as you play it in the native res. Because as soon as you turn that resolution up at all, you start to get massive drops in your frame rates. Let me see if I can remember how to boost. There we go. Yeah, pass by all these guys. So yeah, this emulation, not half bad. Let's move on to the next emulated box. Moving on to some Dreamcast emulation now. Running much more smooth, 60 FPS all the time and on all places. And as you can see, I'm just absolutely terrible at this game. And I get distracted somehow for some silly odd reason. So, this is great. All the games run great. Just works. Let's move on to the next emulated box. Okay, so we're not quite emulating another box. This is more like a handheld box. And this is going okay. Like, this is very playable. It's not great. See, sometimes we're dipping into 40 FPS territory. I know this runs much better on a PC with a GPU, but yeah, this is playable. It's not terrible. This particular game I'm playing, that you may or may not know the name of, is listed as being great compatibility. So I don't think there's anything more compatible with this emulator than now. And yeah, it definitely could be a lot better if we had a little bit more horsepowers in our PC. But yeah, still playable, not great. Let's check something else out. I'm not even going to try and explain what handheld we're emulating right now because honestly, I don't think anybody is going to know anyway. But this is apparently a popular game on it, and apparently it's running very well. But this is above native resolution, and it's very smooth. Just incredibly smooth, and all games play like this on this PC, so yeah, nothing to worry about at all. We have 12 gigs in the Acer Aspire 3 now, meaning I put an 8 gig DIMM in it. So that, combined with the 4 gigs of onboard memory, means we have 12 gigs of RAM now, and Forza Horizon 5 actually works. Yay for us! We get to play this woke piece of garbage to our heart's content. And we're getting about 40 FPS here in 1366 by 768 in the lowest details possible. Here I am in the ass end of the pack, and yeah, I'm not even seeing 40, but it's playable. I gotta admit. I mean, if you really want to play this horrible game, I guess now you can. Let's move on to something else. We are rounding out our playing games with the Acer Aspire 3 video with a little bit of Counter-Strike CSGO. This is the native resolution of the display, 1600 by 900, all the detail settings set to the lowest possible. This is going pretty smoothly, I gotta say. So what we should do is just, I can't run MSI Afterburner while we're playing CSGO, so I do see some frame rate skips every once in a while. This is just a plain old bot match, so network lag is not an issue here. And ooh, I downed the bomb carrier. Oh, I'm dangerous. Oh, yeah. So let's turn up the details a little bit, see if we still get this super smooth 60 FPS. Okay, so I tried to change the detail settings in the middle of the game and it force quit. So let's go back in and see just what happened. Okay, so that is medium details on Counter-Strike Global Offensive. I guess it just likes to force quit to the desktop. Would not recommend that at all. So this has been playing games with the Acer Aspire 3 here on Theje's Notebook Review. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and you guys have a good night. I have a Steam Deck on the way, by the way, so yeah. that's coming soon. Steam Deck content gonna be happening here. So subscribe if you want to see it, please. Yeah, I'm excited. I don't know about you. I'm excited. It's gonna be great. Steam Deck.